Well, hello, everybody. This is Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show. You know, it's Friday, and we always do the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Tony, Joe, and I have been doing this program together now for over 20 years, and he's just full of a lot of great information. Today, he talks about what the color of your exhaust can tell you about what might be wrong with your car. Also, he's got tons of stories about being the second opinion on how much a repair will cost. He tells probably the worst one he's ever seen that they brought into his shop. But anyway, we'll talk a lot about all kinds of things today, so stick around. And if you have a question for me, go to prudentmoney.com. Just send it in to info@prudentmoney.com. Enjoy the program.
KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC Commerce, KMWC Bethany. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, can the color of your exhaust tell you what might be wrong with your car? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Tony Joe's here with me, as he is every Friday, to take your Car Corner questions. The number to call, lines are open, 1-877-913-5357, 1-877-913-5357. You can also go to the website if you got a question for me and send it in. I'll get that taken care of for you. That's all at prudentmoney.com. 1-877-913-5357. Well, Tony Joe, I just turned up your mic. How you doing?
Good. Very good. How are you?
I'm good. I was curious because you've told me some outrageous stories about how, we always talk about if you get a big car estimate, a big repair estimate, always get a second opinion, and the benchmark you use is $500, which is what I think makes total sense, because anything with substance is going to start building and get out of control about that price point. I would think.
Well, I just put a value on what would I do, and the value of $500 just seems to me like a pretty good benchmark.
It does. I don't know why, but it does.
Going over that. But let me just say one thing. You always get a second opinion. You may have a good tech that you trust that's been working on your car for years. You trust him. He can explain everything to you in clear, concise information that you understand, even though you're not a mechanic. In those cases, I don't necessarily say get a second opinion. What I'm talking about is if you don't know anybody and you're going to a shop and you're not sure, your instincts kind of throwing up a few red flags here and there, like that doesn't make sense, then you need to get a second opinion, because there are times when the technician can be, look, there's a lot of good places. Most of them are good. But there's those out there that are trying to take advantage of people, and if your instincts are telling you something's wrong, maybe you should get a second opinion, especially if the bill is north of $500, just to be sure you're spending your money on the right thing.
So you had just an outrageous story because of the dollar amounts we were talking about. But and you said that, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of these facts. You said an individual drove a Infiniti into your shop, presented you with a $10,000 probably plus $10,000 repair bill, and talk about what happened.
Well, that's the worst case scenario that I can ever remember in the years and years that I've been doing this. But I think the estimate was around $10,000, and there was a reason for it. There was rust on the vehicle. The vehicle had been near the coast or up north somewhere, but it had a mild amount of rust. I've seen worse, but the dealership that quoted him the price, or the shop, I don't remember where he got the price from, but it was exorbitant, and he had a power steering leak, and it was coming from a line going from point A to point B, and that line was difficult to get to, so they suggested the only way to fix this is to pull the engine out, get in there, and get down in the motor cradle where you can change that line and then put the engine back in and blah, 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 and it was $10,000. And they wanted to change, an excessive amount of parts, in my opinion, because I could clearly see the leak when he showed it to me. But they wanted a new pump, new lines, new rack, in my opinion, they didn't need any of that stuff. And I was right, because we ended up repairing that car. All you need is a little bit of intestinal fortitude to put up with a little inconvenience to get that line off and replace it. And it was $400, his total bill. So, you see,
wow.
There are occasions where, given a exorbitant amount of money to do a particular job, it does make sense to at least get a second opinion. And actually, that's what he was doing. He was getting a second opinion.
Sure.
And then I told him, look, you really don't need all this stuff on this list. But he said, well, can you fix it? And I said, well, yeah, I can fix it. It's going to be a little bit of labor for me to have to get in there and fight with this inconvenient way of doing it, but it can be done. So there's a difference in prices. There's a difference in shops. There's a difference in technicians. There's a difference. Just don't settle for one. I mean, in a lot of cases, don't just go with what you're being told, because you may be wasting an awful lot of money.
Yeah, and the thing that always sticks in the back of my mind is that it's subjective.
Very.
I mean, especially when this just really just grinds on me, is because you think about it's so subjective, and you talk about something like brakes, and how subjective that is, and how you can be overly cautious and be justified being overly cautious. I mean, there's just so many elements to a decision point there.
And on top of that, let me just point out many, many occasions, I can't think of one right at the moment, but the gist of it is, the general premise is, I have seen in so many cases where, let's just talk about a generic job of any kind, Bob, right? Let's say engine repair. Well, the dealer or another shop or whoever you first visit may say, you just need to replace the whole engine. And then you get a second opinion and you find out the engine can be repaired for X amount of dollars, far less than replacing the engine. So look at this from my point of view. If that person were to just go ahead and replace the engine, the problem would have been fixed, right? And it would have been, and nobody's the wiser. But if you got a second opinion and found out it could be fixed for $500, then you've saved yourself a lot of money. So you don't know what you don't know. So if you're not a car guy, like a lot of guys know enough not to get ripped off, dads teach us things and pass down. But there are those people out there that I always think about. And this is true. I've met a lot of people in this business, a lot of guys, older guys, are knowledgeable enough to not get ripped off, or at least have the instinct that, hey, that doesn't sound right according to my knowledge, and they're usually right. But there are other people in this world now who have been brought up in the technical age. They just don't even lift a hood on a car. They don't know, and it's not a bad thing, but they don't know anything about an automobile. And these are the people that I always try to think about. If I was that person, knowing what I know, and I was a person who didn't know anything about a car, how are they going to, what protects them from ripoff? How do they get a fair shake? Okay? And there's a plethora of things that you would have to do, research and, The only thing, the best way to do it is to just find some friend or neighbor or person at church or somebody that knows a good mechanic. You say, hey, who do you go to? And they say, well, I go to this guy over here. He's always treated me fair.
Well, what do I do if, let's say, you're my mechanic, and you're my, first and second opinion, and I still think I'm getting ripped off?
You listen and you pay, regardless of the circumstance. How many times, Bob, have you called me about one of your kids? They took their car in to get a simple oil change, and something happened, and they want bukus of money. You know the reality of it. And it's embarrassing for me as a person who's been in the business most of his whole adult life to have to defend some of the bad apples out there that are taking advantage of people, and there's no reason for it, no justified reason for it, except money. Obviously, money is the justified reason that they're doing it. Well, there's a fine line between, God knows what you're doing. You're not going to hide. So
the other thing too is that obviously I didn't instill my boys with the ability to fix a car or anything like that.
No, your wife did that.
Yeah, that's right.
She knows far more than you ever will.
All right, you have to rub it in. But I have drilled into their brains that there are people in this world who will rip you off. And if you ever feel like you're getting upsold on something, take a step back. And what's funny is, and I especially saw this with my younger, who's now 21.
And more rebellious.
No, not really. And he always goes, "Whoa, air filter? I can order that off of Amazon and replace that myself."
Mm-hmm. Good for
So
him.
they're not, this generation, this younger generation's not scared to figure it out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I personally would never do that, but there's no telling what I could mess up changing out an air filter.
Well, let me just tell you that it is a good thing that he has the attitude, can look it up on YouTube, something simple like that, because there is no reason to pay $50 or $60 to have your air filter replaced when you can do it for $8 yourself. So there is a point to initiative in the young man, and I'm proud of him. So, of course, I've always been proud of him. He's a good boy, and he likes to fish, and I like to fish.
187.
How bad could he be?
Yeah, how bad could he be? 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call. Okay, so Chris says he sent me on we use Skype. You know what Skype? Do you know what Skype is?
Skype?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's some kind of, what do you call, internet thing. I don't know.
They're about
Okay,
Microsoft's about to get rid of it. So
Okay, I got
anyway,
nothing.
it's kind of a mute question. He says, I had to drive behind an Acura with stinky blue smoke coming from the tailpipe after lunch, which is a good segue into our discussion on exhaust and what it means, because I don't even think people realize this, but I mean, there's about 5, 6 different colors that exhaust could come out the back and mean something that's going on with your car.
It's the pink one with blue polka dots you got to watch out for.
Oh,
That's
the dreaded
Yeah.
Penelope pit stop.
That's right. Good one. That's good. Penelope pit smoke. That's the one that can cost you a lot of money.
What cartoon was that? Speed Racer.
Perhaps.
It was
Bob.
Speed Racer. It was when I was a little kid, very little kid.
But Bob, you're younger than me. It's beyond me. I heard the name, but I never watched Penelope. What is it?
I think it's Penelope's Pit Stop.
Yeah, I've never.
I think that's Speed Racer.
What about Batman? Back in the day, Gotham City.
Oh yeah, I used to always watch that.
Superman.
Okay, if I could get you to focus.
Okay, what do you want to know? Smoke. Yeah. Now, Chris says he followed someone, which is annoying, and it really is offensive when you have to follow a car that's smoking up a storm, and more than likely, what did he say, blue smoke?
Yes, he said, quote, stinky blue smoke.
Okay. Yeah, that's burning oil. Now, blue smoke, in many cases, is the fact that the engine is worn out due to bad piston rings or some other reason. There are exceptions for those technicians out there that are listening. I know the PVC system and their intake valve stem seals, other things that it can be. But if you're generally smoking going down the highway, you've got a problem with piston rings. Most of the time, intake seals or the valve seals, they will usually leak worse at idle, and it'll smoke at idle. And then when you take off, it pretty much clears up. And PCV system, same thing. So I'm just assuming from what few words Chris reported to me that more than likely that engine is worn out. It's got stuck, broken, seized. There's a number of things, but, it's burning a lot of oil. And that's usually going to be blue smoke coming out of the tailpipe. And it, in fact, smells like burning oil if you happen to know what that smells like. So anyway, that's blue smoke. Now, there are different colors that can kind of indicate what's wrong with your car. But one of the things I want to point out is something I get a lot of calls on. A lot of people ask me, my own customers call me, and when you get into this time of the year, here's where I want to start. Whenever hot air cools down, it releases the moisture from the molecules of air. And that moisture, just like miniature water droplets, will settle to the bottom of whatever it's contained in. And the thing I'm trying to paint a picture of is the exhaust system in the car is hot when you drive home from work. You turn it off, and the hot air cools down, and that moisture will be released, and it'll lay in the bottom of the tailpipe. It'll lay in the bottom of the muffler. It'll lay in the bottom of the converter, and any other pipes and added exhaust parts that you have on the car. So when you start it up the next day, sometimes, especially if it's a humid day, but it's colder at night, like this time of the year, the humidity that infiltrates the air will cause that hot exhaust, which gets to 1,300 degrees within a few seconds in some places of the exhaust. It will turn that water into steam. The steam will come out the tailpipe. You will think there's something wrong with your car because it's producing steam. You think it's white smoke. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with my car? I got white smoke coming out the tailpipe. Well, normally, if you'll just be patient, if that white smoke disappears within 2 or 3 minutes, you'll know it was simply the moisture in the exhaust. The exhaust is hot air. It evaporated the water, came out as steam, and when the water's dissipated from inside all the internal parts of the exhaust, you won't have anything coming out the tailpipe. It'll just be clean air. You won't see any smoke. Now, that's a perfect example because if you really want to see how that happens, if you start your car on a fairly cold morning and you go back, Bob, how many of us haven't gone back to the tailpipe and looked right at it and seen the actual water droplets coming out? Nobody, of course, because nobody does that. But it would happen if you did that.
I was just really waiting to see where you're going to go with that question.
You weren't paying attention. I just wanted to see if you... Anyway, water. Water is not necessarily a bad thing. Before you get nervous, wait a couple of minutes. After the car runs, warms up, give it a chance to evaporate all that water, and then you won't see anything coming out the tailpipe. Then you will know what that kind of experience is so that in the future when you see that, you won't be worried about it because that worries an awful lot of people, and it's a very benign thing. There's nothing to be worried about. It's a natural thing from the pollution of the engine that's expended in the condensation of the exhaust after hot air cools down. So nothing to worry about. Perfectly normal, perfectly fine.
1-877-913-5357. That is the number to call, and we do have a line open. Tony Joe, just for your information, Penelope Pit Stop was not in Speed Racer. Chris, a encyclopedia full of knowledge, just sent me, I think he looked it up on AI. He says, Wacky Racers had Penelope Pit Stop. I had no idea.
Good to know. Thank you, Chris.
I think I was only 2 at the time, though.
Well, if you were 2, I was like 52.
20, yeah, 30, 40.
I didn't watch Penelope Pit Stop. I don't know who that is.
Okay, so Tony Joe, I had a question come in.
But I do remember the days you actually had to get up off the couch to turn the channel. Do you remember that?
It's yes, I do.
No remotes.
Black and white.
Black and white. You wanted to change the channel, you had to get up, put your potato chips down, get up, walk to the TV, and turn the dial.
Yeah, that's an old memory.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm an old guy. What can I tell you?
1-877-913-5357. That is the number to call, and I do have a line open. The now I got to find the question again, Tony Joe. You got me off. You got me. Here we go. When do you know if you need a brake job? Do you just wait until you hear the squealing noises? What are the few things that I look for? And doesn't the squealing noises come automatically with the fact that I mean, at that point, it's pretty well, you need to be thinking about it.
Well, first of all, let me just say that brake squeal in itself does not necessarily mean you need a brake job. Brake squeal can be produced from a number of factors that occur with the brake pad material that sets in the caliper. Now, having said that, here is the important thing about brake squeals that I want to just try to make it clear to you, Bob, because if I make it clear to you, others will understand the same thing.
What are you saying there?
Well, you're saying brake squeals, and I get that. But here's the important thing to know. There is a pad indicator on most vehicles made of a piece of basically tin. And all it does is scratch the rotor 2/32 of an inch before the pad material completely wears out. So now you say, well, so what does that mean in English? Well, that means you're going to hear a scratching noise like fingernails scratching on a blackboard when you're going in a quiet neighborhood or maybe in an alley where the fence will echo the sounds back to you, and you're going to hear this noise. Now, here's the important part. Not when you're applying the brake, when you're not applying the brake. You're going 7 miles an hour. You're going down this back alley or quiet neighborhood street. You're going to hear this. The only way I can describe it, as much as I hate to think of it myself, is fingernails scratching on a blackboard. Mm-hmm. You'll hear the noise. Now, you put on the brake just a little bit. Just touch it with your foot to apply the brake, and that noise will be absorbed into the padding material of the brakes, and it will completely disappear. And you let up, and you hear that noise. That is a brake indicator, a manual audio brake indicator trying to tell you something. It's trying to tell you that your pad material is getting low. So if you know that information and you go in to get your brakes checked and they tell you your brakes are pretty much done, it's time for a brake job, then you won't be surprised and you won't be feeling like you're being, taken advantage of, because you kind of know the information up front. You kind of know how to listen for it. And now when they tell you you need a brake job, don't be surprised, because that's, in fact, probably what you need. Now, there's a lot of cars, you will notice, at an intersection that come up to a stop next to you. You're sitting at a light, and they come up approaching their stop, and the brakes squeal. That's not necessarily indicative of a worn-out brake pad. That does not mean that they need a brake job. That's other factors that were either not properly done during the last brake job or other factors that can influence the brake squeal. So don't confuse the two, because just about every big truck that pulls up next to you is going to squeal. They're just glad to get the thing stopped, okay? Brake squeals are not necessarily dangerous. They're noisy and obnoxious, but they're not necessarily mean you need a brake job.
So what causes it?
Well, mismatch between the padding material and the rotor material. A lot of times, for instance, you will be driving along in the spring and a storm will pop up. And you're driving along in city traffic and your brakes are hot. Now remember, when you use the brakes from light to light and stop and go traffic, those rotors get really hot. And then all of a sudden a storm pops up and the roads are flooded before you get home, or there's puddles on the side of the road, and you go through a puddle of cool water with brake rotors that are that hot, they become glazed with a coating of material that crystallizes the outside metal of the rotor. Now, that can cause a brake squeal. That stuff will build up on the rotor, and when the pads are applied, i.e. you hit the brake to stop, that glazed material can often cause a brake squeal.
So I had a mechanic tell me one time that you could, because I had this squeal this a long time ago, and he said to get on the toll road, get your car going at about 75 or 80, then hit the brakes real fast.
Well, see, that is...
By the way, nobody try that.
Yeah, don't try that at home, kids. No, but that, Bob, believe it or not, that could break the glaze from the rotors. Mm-hmm. It's not a very good practice. I don't suggest it. You can also have the rotors resurfaced on a machine to break the glaze, but you normally don't, and here's my point, brake squeals. Does that mean you're in danger? No. A lot of times I'll tell people, look, your brake pads still have money to be used up. They're still thick enough to where you don't need a brake job yet. Live with the squeal and wait till you need a brake job. Then you handle it all at once.
This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.